I opened the door expecting a package delivery, but instead found my mother-in-law standing on the threshold with three large suitcases, a garment bag draped over her arm, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch, and I could smell the faint scent of her expensive perfume, the same one she'd worn at our wedding 5 years ago. My heart did a strange flip in my chest, not from joy, but from something closer to dread. "Surprise," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, in that way that always made me feel like I was failing some invisible test. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by." I looked at the suitcases, three of them. This wasn't dropping by. This was moving in. "Of course not," I heard myself say, the words automatic, years of politeness training overriding the alarm bells clanging in my head. "Come in, let me help you with those." She waved me away and pulled the largest suitcase over the threshold herself, the wheels catching on the door frame with a sound like grinding teeth. "I can manage. You know me, always independent." I did know her. That was precisely the problem. My name is Vivian, and until that moment, I thought I had my life reasonably under control. My husband worked long hours at a consulting firm downtown. Our 2-year-old daughter was finally sleeping through most nights, and I just started a remote position that let me contribute to our income while staying home. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. A small, carefully balanced ecosystem that required constant attention and adjustment, like a terrarium that would die if you opened the lid too wide. I stood in the doorway, my hand still on the knob, watching her survey our modest living room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it disappointment, concern, calculation? "How long are you planning to stay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, conversational. The question felt enormous in my mouth, like I was asking something far more significant than a simple duration. She turned to look at me then, and her smile widened. It was the smile of someone who knew they held all the cards and was deciding moment by moment which ones to play. "Oh, didn't he tell you?" She set down her purse on our coffee table, moving aside the stack of children's books I'd been reading to my daughter that morning. "I'm moving in." The words hung in the air between us, impossible and absolute. "Moving in," I repeated, my brain struggling to process the statement as anything other than a joke. "As in permanently?" "Well, not permanently," she said, laughing as if I'd said something charmingly naive. "Just until I get back on my feet. 6 months, maybe a year. It depends on how things go." My hands went cold. 6 months to a year. I thought about our tiny house, the spare room that barely fit a twin bed and served as my makeshift office, the single bathroom we already had to coordinate around. I thought about privacy, about spontaneity, about the thousand small freedoms that made a house a home rather than just a building where people slept. "I don't understand," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "What happened? Are you okay?" "Oh, I'm fine," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Just some financial adjustments. You know how it is. The market, the economy, all those boring things. And at my age, it makes sense to be around family, especially now that you have little Emma. She needs her grandmother's influence." The way she said influence made something tighten in my chest. Emma was napping upstairs, blissfully unaware that our household was about to undergo a seismic shift. I thought about all the small battles I had already fought and won regarding my daughter's care, the boundaries I had carefully established about bedtimes and screen time, and the kind of food we wanted her to eat. All of it suddenly felt precarious, like a house of cards in a rising wind. "Does he know about this?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Did you talk to him?" "Of course I talked to my son," she said, and there was the slightest edge to her voice now, the first crack in the cheerful facade. "He said it was fine. He said you'd be happy to have the help." Help. The word landed with a thud. I dialed his number, my fingers trembling slightly. It went straight to voicemail, which meant he was either in a meeting or had turned off his phone. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I even say? "Your mother is here with enough luggage for a year-long expedition, and apparently you gave her permission to move in without consulting me first." "Why don't I make us some tea?" she said, already moving toward the kitchen. "We can sit down and chat properly. I want to hear all about how you've been managing. You look tired, dear. Are you getting enough sleep?" I followed her into my own kitchen, watching as she opened cabinets with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, who knew where we kept the mugs and the tea bags. She had been here before, of course. She'd visited when Emma was born, stayed for 2 weeks that felt like 2 months, and filled that time with helpful suggestions that somehow always made me feel like I was doing everything wrong. I'm managing fine, I said, leaning against the counter. We're managing fine. Of course you are, she said, her tone implying the exact opposite. But there's always room for improvement, isn't there? That's what family is for, to help each other improve. The kettle began to whistle, a sound that felt like it was coming from very far away. I watched her pour water into 2 mugs, watched her select the tea bags with the same careful consideration she probably gave to everything, and I felt something inside me begin to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. Like ice on a lake at the beginning of spring, when you could still walk on it, but you absolutely knew, that it wouldn't hold forever. When he finally called back 3 hours later, I was sitting on our bed with the door closed, my daughter playing quietly downstairs under her grandmother's watchful eye. I could hear them through the floor, the sound of blocks being stacked and knocked down, punctuated by Emma's delighted laughter and her grandmother's theatrical gasps of surprise. Hey, he said, and I could hear the defensiveness already in his voice, which meant he knew exactly why I was calling. Sorry I missed you earlier. What's up? What's up? I repeated slowly. Is that your mother is here with suitcases, plural, and she says she's moving in. There was a pause, long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Yeah, he said finally. She called me last week. She's having some money trouble, and I thought, last week, I interrupted. Last week you knew about this and you didn't think to mention it to me. I was going to tell you, he said, and now the defensiveness was sharpening into irritation. I just hadn't found the right time. You've been so stressed lately with work and Emma, and I didn't want to add to your plate. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our small backyard. The grass needed mowing, the fence needed painting. There were 1,000 small tasks that made up the maintenance of a life, and now there would be 1,000 more, all complicated by the presence of someone who thought she knew better than I did how to run my own household. So instead, you just let her show up, I said. You let her pack her things and drive over here and walk in like it was already decided. It is my mother, he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, too. What was I supposed to do? Tell her no? Tell her she can't stay with her own son? You were supposed to talk to me, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to keep it level. You were supposed to discuss it with me like I'm your partner, not just inform me after the fact like I'm. I stopped myself before I said it. Like I'm nobody. Like I don't matter. Like this isn't my home, too. Look, he said, and I could hear him taking a breath, trying to smooth over the moment. It's temporary. She just needs a place to land while she figures things out. And honestly, having her here might be good for you. She can help with Emma, maybe give you a break, let you focus on your work. There it was again. Help. As if I'd asked for it. As if I needed it. I don't need a break from our daughter, I said quietly. And I don't need your mother's help. Well, she's here now, he said, and his voice had gone flat, the way it always did when he'd decided the conversation was over. So we might as well make the best of it. I've got to go. There's a client thing. We'll talk more when I get home. He hung up before I could respond. I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the sounds of my daughter playing with her grandmother downstairs, and I felt something shift inside me, not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Not just betrayal, though that was there too. It was something colder and more calculating, a recognition that I was in a game I hadn't realized I was playing, and I was already several moves behind. That night after Emma was asleep and my husband had come home and kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, I lay awake in bed and stared at the ceiling. I could hear his mother moving around in the spare room, the creak of the unfamiliar bed, the sound of her unpacking, making herself at home. I thought about the next 6 months to a year. I thought about every meal, every conversation, every moment of every day with an audience, with someone watching and evaluating and offering their helpful suggestions. I thought about my marriage, already stressed by the normal pressures of work and parenting and money, now bearing the additional weight of a third adult with opinions about how we should be living our lives. And I thought about power, about who had it and who didn't, about how easily it could be taken from you if you weren't paying attention. The next morning, I woke before everyone else and made coffee in the silent kitchen. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the walls gold, and for a moment the house felt like it was still mine. I stood at the window with my hands wrapped around the warm mug and made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own home. I wasn't going to spend the next year tiptoeing around someone else's expectations, slowly losing pieces of myself until I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. If this was going to be a battle, then I would fight it. But I would fight it smart. I would fight it the way she did, with smiles and implications and careful moves that looked like nothing until you realized you'd been checkmated. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see her coming into the kitchen, already dressed and made up despite the early hour. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I thought I smelled coffee. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, pouring her a cup without being asked. "I was thinking about how we're going to make this arrangement work. There are probably some things we should discuss." "Of course," she said, accepting the coffee with a smile. "I want this to be comfortable for everyone. That's the most important thing." I smiled back at her, and I made sure it reached my eyes. "Yes," I said, "comfort. That's exactly what I was thinking about, too." The first week was a careful dance of boundaries and small assertions of territory. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets to be more efficient. I rearranged them back when she went to the grocery store, claiming I couldn't find anything. She bought new towels in colors that matched her preferred aesthetic. I thanked her profusely and then stored them in the linen closet, continuing to use our old ones. She suggested a new bedtime routine for Emma that involved more structure and less spontaneity. I listened carefully, nodded thoughtfully, and continued doing exactly what I'd been doing. It was exhausting. Every day felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next incursion, the next helpful suggestion that was really a criticism, the next way she would try to reshape our household in her image. And every day I pushed back gently but firmly, trying to maintain the boundaries of my own life, while she slowly, inexorably tried to erase them. My husband seemed oblivious to it all. He came home from work, kissed us both, ate whatever dinner had been prepared, and retreated to his laptop or his phone. When I tried to talk to him about the tension, about the constant low-level conflict that was making my shoulders tight and my jaw ache, he sighed and said I was being too sensitive. "She's just trying to help," he said, for what felt like the 100th time. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But she did mean something by it. Every suggestion, every raised eyebrow, every comment about how things were done in her house when he was growing up, it all meant something. It meant that she thought she knew better. It meant that she saw me as inadequate. It meant that she was slowly, methodically trying to take over the role I'd spent 5 years building for myself. The breaking point came 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other. I was working at the kitchen table, my laptop open, trying to focus on a project deadline while Emma played with her blocks nearby. My mother-in-law was in the living room, ostensibly reading a book, but I could feel her attention on us like a physical weight. Emma knocked over her tower and let out a frustrated wail. I got up to help her, but before I could take 2 steps, her grandmother was there, sweeping her up with practiced ease. "There, there," she cooed. "Grandma's here. Let's build it together, shall we? And this time, we'll do it the right way." Something in me snapped. "The right way?" I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "What's that supposed to mean?" She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I just meant we could build it so it doesn't fall over so easily. There's a technique to it." "She's 2 years old," I said. "The point isn't to build the perfect tower. The point is for her to experiment and learn." "Of course," she said, still holding Emma, who was looking between us with confused eyes. "I'm just trying to help her avoid frustration." "She needs to learn how to handle frustration," I said, and I could hear my voice rising. "That's part of learning. You can't just swoop in every time something doesn't go perfectly and fix it for her." "I wasn't fixing it," she said, and now there was steel under the sweetness. "I was teaching her. There's a difference." "You were undermining me," I said, the words finally out in the open after 3 weeks of swallowing them. "You were stepping in when I was right there, ready to handle it myself, and you were making it clear that you think your way is better." She set Emma down carefully, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. When she looked at me, the mask of pleasant helpfulness had slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. It wasn't malice exactly, but it wasn't kindness either. It was certainty. The absolute conviction that she knew best, that her way was the right way, and that anyone who disagreed was simply wrong. I raised a successful son, she said quietly. I think that gives me some credibility when it comes to child rearing. And I'm raising my daughter, I said, my hands shaking with the effort of keeping my voice level. My daughter, not yours, mine. We stood there in the kitchen, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, and everything that had been unspoken for 3 weeks hung between us like smoke. I think, she said finally, that you're feeling threatened by my presence, and I understand that. It's natural to feel protective of your domain, but you need to understand something too. This is my son's house, as much as it is yours. And as long as I'm living here, I have just as much right to be part of this family's daily life as you do. My son's house, not our house, not even their house. His house, as if I was just a visitor who happened to share his bed. The rage that flooded through me then was white hot and clarifying. In that moment, I saw exactly what the next 6 months would look like if I didn't do something drastic. I saw myself slowly being eroded, my authority as a mother questioned at every turn, my role as the manager of my own household usurped by someone who believed she had more right to it than I did. I saw my marriage crumbling under the weight of divided loyalties, my husband choosing his mother's feelings over mine because it was easier, because it kept the peace, because he'd been trained since birth to put her needs first. I saw myself disappearing, and I decided in that crystalline moment that I would not allow it. You're right, I said, and I watched confusion flicker across her face at my sudden agreement. This is his house as much as mine, so I think we need to have a family meeting, the three of us, tonight, to discuss exactly what this arrangement is going to look like going forward. I don't think that's necessary, she said, already backpedaling from the confrontation she'd started. We can just... Tonight, I repeated. After dinner, because you're absolutely right that we need to clarify things, all of us. I didn't wait for her response. I picked up Emma, who had been watching our exchange with worried eyes, and carried her upstairs to her room. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from something else, something that felt almost like excitement. I spent the rest of the afternoon making a list. Not the kind of list you make when you're grocery shopping or planning a party, but the kind you make when you're preparing for war. I wrote down every incident from the past 3 weeks, every boundary crossed, every subtle dig, every moment of undermining. I wrote down dates and times and exact quotes as best as I could remember them. I documented it all with the clinical precision of someone gathering evidence, because that's what this was, evidence, proof that I wasn't being too sensitive or imagining things or failing to appreciate help, proof that what was happening in my house was a systematic attempt to diminish my authority and replace me as the primary decision maker in my own life. When my husband came home that evening, I was waiting for him in our bedroom. His mother had taken Emma to the park, giving us privacy whether she intended to or not. We need to talk, I said, before he could even set down his briefcase. He looked at me warily. Okay, about what? About your mother, about this arrangement, about the fact that it's not working. He sighed and sat down on the bed, already looking tired. What happened now? What happened, I said, keeping my voice even, is that we had a conversation today about boundaries and respect, and it became very clear that she sees this as your house, not ours. That she sees herself as having equal authority to me when it comes to raising our daughter, and that if we don't establish very clear rules right now, the next 6 months are going to destroy our marriage. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment when he realized I wasn't exaggerating or being dramatic. I was stating a fact. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I want you to be on my side, I said. I want you to support me when she oversteps. I want you to make it clear that I am Emma's mother, and I get final say on how she's raised. And I want you to start looking for alternative arrangements for your mother, because this isn't sustainable. She has nowhere else to go, he said, and I heard the guilt in his voice. She lost her condo, she's got debt, Then we help her find somewhere, I interrupted. We help her get on her feet. We support her financially if we need to. But she cannot live here, not like this, not with her trying to take over my role in my own family. He was quiet for a long moment, turning it over in his mind. I could see the competing loyalties warring in his eyes, his mother and his wife, and I knew this was the moment. This was where he would either choose our marriage or choose the path of least resistance. What if we set up some ground rules, he said finally, really clear ones, and I'll enforce them. I'll make sure she respects your authority with Emma, and I'll talk to her about finding her own place within the next few months instead of staying for a year. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was support. It was him finally seeing what I'd been trying to tell him for 3 weeks. Okay, I said. But I mean it about the timeline. I'm not spending a year like this. 3 months maximum. And if she can't respect the boundaries we set, even that's negotiable. He nodded, looking exhausted. 3 months, I'll talk to her tonight. The family meeting that evening was every bit as uncomfortable as I had anticipated. We sat in the living room after Emma was in bed, the three of us arranged like opposing forces at a negotiation table. I had my list, though I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. I had it all memorized. My husband started by explaining that we needed to establish some clear guidelines to make sure everyone was comfortable during this temporary arrangement. He emphasized the word temporary, and I saw his mother's mouth tighten slightly, though she nodded and smiled. Of course, she said. I certainly don't want to overstay my welcome. It's not about overstaying, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. It's about making sure we all understand our roles. You're Emma's grandmother, and that's wonderful, but I'm her mother. When it comes to decisions about her care, her discipline, her routine, those are mine to make. Naturally, she said, though her eyes had gone cold. I would never presume to replace you. I know you wouldn't mean to, I said, holding her gaze, but sometimes help can feel like interference. So I'd like to be clear. If Emma needs something, I'd appreciate if you'd check with me first before stepping in. Think of it as supporting me rather than helping her directly. I could see her processing this, see her trying to find a way to disagree without seeming unreasonable. What about when you're working? She asked. Surely you'd want me to handle things then, rather than interrupting your focus. If I'm working and Emma needs something urgent, absolutely. But for routine things, non-emergencies, I'd still like to be consulted. It might seem like extra work, but it's important to me. My husband cleared his throat. Mom, I think what we're asking for is pretty reasonable. We appreciate everything you do, but we need to maintain our parenting dynamic. And on that note, we also need to talk about your timeline for finding your own place. She turned to him with an expression of wounded surprise. I thought we agreed on 6 months to a year. That's what we initially discussed, he said, and I felt a surge of gratitude that he was actually holding firm. But I think a shorter timeline would be better for everyone. 3 months to get your finances sorted out and find somewhere more permanent. 3 months, she repeated flatly. And where exactly am I supposed to go in 3 months? Do you know how tight the rental market is right now? Do you know how hard it is for someone my age to find suitable housing? We'll help you, I said. We can look at places together, help with applications, even help with a deposit if needed. But 3 months gives us all an end date to work toward. Otherwise, it's too open-ended. She looked between us, and I could see her recalculating. She'd come here expecting to settle in, to become a permanent fixture, to slowly reshape our household until it ran the way she thought it should. And now we were telling her that wasn't going to happen. I see, she said finally. Well, I suppose I don't have much choice, do I? It's your house, after all. There was that phrase again. Your house, not my son's house this time, but your house, thrown back at us with just enough bitterness to make the point. It's not about choices, my husband said quietly. It's about what's best for everyone, including you. Living with us long term isn't healthy for any of us. You need your independence, your own space. We all do. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll turn in early. It's been a very illuminating evening. She left the room without waiting for a response, and we heard her bedroom door close firmly upstairs. That went well, my husband said dryly. It went how it needed to go, I said. She's not happy, but she heard us. Now we just have to make sure we hold the line. He pulled me against him, and I let myself lean into his chest for a moment. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have talked to you before telling her she could move in. I knew you'd say yes eventually, and I took advantage of that. It wasn't fair to you. It was the first real apology I'd gotten, and I felt some of the tightness in my chest ease. Thank you, I said. Just don't let it happen again. We're a team, remember? We're supposed to make big decisions together. I know, he said. I remember. I won't forget again. The next 2.5 months were a masterclass in sustained tension. My mother-in-law didn't overtly violate the boundaries we'd set, but she tested them constantly, pushing at the edges to see where there was give. She would ask to take Emma to the park, then conveniently forget to check in about snack choices or nap times. She would offer to help with laundry, then wash everything in hot water, despite my explicit instructions about cold water for certain items. She would suggest dinner menus that ignored my daughter's food sensitivities, then act hurt when I gently corrected her. Every day was a small battle, and every small battle was exhausting. But I held the line. When she overstepped, I corrected her firmly but politely. When she pushed back, I didn't engage in arguments. I simply restated the boundary and walked away. I learned that the most powerful thing I could do was refuse to be drawn into her drama, refuse to play the game she wanted to play, where I was the unreasonable daughter-in-law, and she was the martyred mother just trying to help. My husband, to his credit, backed me up. It clearly pained him to see his mother hurt and rejected, as she made sure we knew she felt. But he held firm on the boundaries we'd set, and he held firm on the 3-month timeline. 6 weeks in, she started actually looking at apartments. 8 weeks in, she found a place she claimed to like. 10 weeks in, she signed a lease with our help for the deposit. And at 12 weeks exactly, 2 days ahead of schedule, she packed her 3 suitcases, her garment bag, and the various other possessions she'd accumulated during her stay, and moved out. The day she left, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in 3 months. Thank you for your hospitality, she said at the door, her tone suggesting anything but gratitude. I hope I wasn't too much of a burden. Not at all, I lied smoothly. We're glad we could help, and we'll see you soon. We'll bring Emma by to visit once you're settled. She kissed her son goodbye, bent to hug Emma, and gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Take care of them, she said. I'm trusting you with my family. My family, not our family, mine. I smiled back, just as insincerely. I always do. We watched her drive away, and then my husband closed the door and turned to me with an expression of profound relief. Is it terrible that I'm so happy to see her go? He asked. Not even a little bit, I said. That night, after Emma was asleep, we sat together on the couch in the living room that was finally just ours again. The house felt different, larger somehow, as if the walls had physically expanded with her departure. I could hear the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of our neighbor's dog bark in, the creak of the house settle in. All the small sounds that had been drowned out by the constant presence of someone else. I need to tell you something, my husband said, and something in his tone made me turn to look at him. What is it? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. When she first called and asked to move in, my initial reaction was no. I knew it would be difficult, and I knew how you'd feel about it. But then she started crying and talking about how she had nowhere else to go, how I was her only son, how she'd sacrificed so much for me growing up. And I couldn't say no. I felt like I owed her. I waited, knowing there was more. But these last 3 months, watching what it did to you, to us, to our family, I realized something. I realized that I've been letting her guilt me into things my whole life. And I realized that at some point, I stopped being her son and started being her emotional support system. That's not healthy. That's not what that relationship is supposed to be. No, I agreed quietly. It's not. I'm going to set better boundaries with her, he said. Real ones. Not just about living with us, but about everything. About how often she calls. About what she's entitled to weigh in on. About what she expects from me. Because if I don't, this is just going to happen again in some other form. I took his hand and squeezed it. This was the conversation I'd been hoping to have for 3 months, maybe for 5 years. The moment when he finally saw what I'd been seeing, the dynamic that had been slowly poisoning our relationship because he couldn't see it clearly enough to address it. I'll support you in that, I said, whatever you need. I know, he said, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I put you through these 3 months. You saw it eventually, I said. That's what matters. We sat in the quiet for a long moment, and then he said, you know, when she first showed up and you asked how long she was staying, and she said she was moving in, I really thought you'd just accept it. I thought you'd complain a little, but ultimately go along with it because that's easier than fighting. I didn't realize you'd actually stand up to her. I almost didn't, I admitted. For the first few weeks, I thought about just enduring it, keeping my head down until it was over. But then I realized that if I did that, it would never really be over. She'd know she could push me around, and she'd keep doing it forever. So I decided I'd rather fight. I'm glad you did, he said. I needed to see that. I needed to see someone actually hold their ground with her instead of just giving in. 3 months after my mother-in-law moved out, we were still adjusting to the aftermath of her stay. The boundaries my husband had promised to set were slowly and perfectly taking shape. She called less frequently, and when she did call, he was better about not dropping everything to cater to her needs. We visited her new apartment once with Emma, endured an afternoon of her subtle digs about how much smaller and less nice it was than our house, and left with the understanding that future visits would be on our terms, not hers. I'd like to say everything went back to normal immediately, that the house felt like ours again the moment she drove away. But the truth was more complicated. There were lingering tensions, invisible scars from 3 months of constant low-level conflict. I found myself on edge sometimes, waiting for her key to turn in the lock, even though she didn't have a key anymore. My husband would make a decision without consulting me, and I'd freeze, wondering if he was backsliding into old patterns. We had to learn how to be just us again, without a third presence shaping every interaction. But we did learn. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt the partnership that her presence had strained. We had hard conversations about boundaries and respect and what we wanted our marriage to look like. We talked about the fact that his loyalty needed to be to our immediate family first, his family of origin second. We talked about my need to feel heard and supported, and his need to not feel caught between the two women in his life. And we talked about what would happen if she asked to move back in again someday. It's not happening, he said firmly when I brought it up one night. Not ever. If she needs help, we'll find other ways to provide it. But she's not living here again. I won't do that to you, to us, to our family. What if she really has nowhere else to go? I asked, testing him. What if it's a genuine emergency? Then we'll help her find somewhere, he said. We'll pay for it if we have to. But she's not moving back in. That's not negotiable anymore. I believed him, not because I was naive or because I'd forgotten how easily he'd been swayed before, but because I'd watched him change over the past 3 months. I'd watched him see his mother clearly for the first time, see the manipulation and the guilt tripping and the way she tried to control everyone around her, and I'd watched him decide that he didn't want to live like that anymore. 6 months after she moved out, Emma started preschool. On her first day, I drove her to the bright building with its cheerful murals and its promise of independence, and I walked her to her classroom with my heart in my throat. Her teacher, a kind woman with laugh lines around her eyes, bent down to Emma's level and asked if she was excited to make new friends. Emma, my brave, beautiful daughter, looked up at her and said, "Is my grandma going to be here?" The teacher looked confused. "Your grandma?" "No, sweetie, it's just your classmates and me." "Good," Emma said seriously. "Because when Grandma is here, Mommy gets sad." My heart cracked open. I'd thought I'd hidden it so well, thought she was too young to understand the tension that had permeated our house for those 3 months. But children always know. They always see more than we think they do. I knelt down and pulled her close. "Mommy's not sad anymore," I said quietly. "And Grandma lives in her own house now, so she won't be here. This is just for you." She seemed satisfied with that and skipped off into her new classroom without a backward glance, ready for this new adventure. I stood in the doorway watching her, and I thought about all the small battles I'd fought to make sure she grew up in a house where she felt secure, where she knew her mother was in charge, where boundaries were respected and relationships were healthy. It had been exhausting. It had nearly broken me. But standing there watching my daughter confidently navigate her new world, I knew it had been worth it. One year after my mother in law moved out, we had a party. Just a small thing. Some friends from our neighborhood, a few colleagues from my husband's work, people we'd been too exhausted to see socially during those 3 months when our house wasn't really ours. We grilled in the backyard, set up a kiddie pool for Emma and the other children, and let the summer evening stretch out long and warm around us. Someone asked where my mother in law was, why she wasn't there. My husband and I exchanged a glance. She has her own place now, he said easily. We see her regularly, but she's got her own life. It was a diplomatic answer, one that didn't invite follow-up questions. But later, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up the debris of the party, he said quietly, I didn't invite her. I should have told you that. I didn't invite her because I wanted this to just be ours. Our friends, our house, our family. Is that terrible? And no, I said, handing him a trash bag. It's healthy. And it was. It was healthy to have boundaries, to have space, to have a life that wasn't constantly being observed and evaluated and corrected. It was healthy to be able to make decisions without wondering if they'd be undermined, to parent our daughter without a running commentary, to exist in our own home without performing for an audience. The suitcases were long gone, packed away in her closet in her apartment across town, but their shadow had stretched out long after she left, a reminder of how quickly your life could be invaded, how fast you could lose control of your own space if you weren't vigilant. I thought about those suitcases sometimes, about the weight of them, the presumption of them, the way they'd announced that my home was no longer quite mine. And I thought about the question I'd asked when I saw them on my doorstep. How long are you staying? The answer had been meant to shock me, to box me in, to make me accept something I never would have agreed to if I'd been given a choice. Moving in, as if it were already decided, as if my opinion didn't matter. But I'd fought back, I'd held my ground, I'd reclaimed my home and my marriage and my role as a mother. It hadn't been easy and it hadn't been clean, but I'd done it. 2 years after she moved out, my mother-in-law called on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw her name on the caller ID and felt my stomach clench reflexively before I answered. Hello, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, dear, she said, and I could hear something in her tone, something I couldn't quite identify. Is my son home? He's at work. Can I help you with something? There was a pause. I wanted to talk to both of you, but I suppose I can tell you first. I'm getting remarried. The words were so unexpected that I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to look at it, as if I'd somehow misheard. You're what? Remarried, she said, and now I could identify the emotion in her voice. It was happiness, genuine and uncomplicated. I met someone at my bridge club. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months, and he proposed last week. We're thinking a small ceremony in the fall. I sat down on the couch, processing this information. That's wonderful, I said, and I meant it. Congratulations. Thank you, she said. I know it's fast, but at our age, why wait? Life is short. We talked for a few more minutes about details, about her plans, about whether Emma could be a flower girl. When we hung up, I sat for a long moment staring at nothing. When my husband came home, I told him the news. He looked as stunned as I'd felt. Remarried, he repeated. She's been single for 30 years, and now she's just remarried? Apparently, I said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he started to laugh. It was a surprised, slightly disbelieving laugh that grew until his eyes were wet. What? I asked, though I was starting to smile too. She was so lonely, he said. All these years she was so lonely, and instead of dealing with it, she tried to insert herself into our lives, into my life. But what she actually needed was her own life, her own person. Yeah, I said, I think you're right. If she'd found him 2 years ago, she never would have asked to move in, he said. She would have been too busy being happy. It was true, and it was also not quite that simple. She hadn't moved in with us just because she was lonely. She'd moved in because she'd lost her financial footing, and because she'd always seen her son's life as partially hers to control. But the loneliness had been part of it, a large part, and now that she'd found someone to share her life with, she had less need to try to live vicariously through ours. We went to the wedding in October. It was a small ceremony in a courthouse, followed by dinner at an upscale restaurant. My mother-in-law wore a cream suit and looked happier than I'd ever seen her. Her new husband was a retired engineer, quiet and kind, who clearly adored her and was willing to accommodate her need to manage and organize and control. He seemed to find her bossiness charming rather than suffocating. They were moving into a new place together, she told us over dinner, a larger apartment than her current one with 2 bedrooms so they could each have their own space when they needed it. She described it in detail, the layout and the finishes and the balcony with a view of the park. She was nesting again, building a home again, but this time it was her own home, not an invasion of someone else's. "You'll have to come visit," she said to us, "once we're settled. Emma would love the park nearby." "We'd like that," my husband said, and I could tell he meant it. The distance we'd established had made it possible for their relationship to be healthier, less fraught, more honest. He could enjoy his mother's company now because she wasn't constantly in his space, constantly demanding his attention and loyalty. On the drive home, Emma asleep in her car seat and the highway lights flashing past in the dark, my husband reached over and took my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For fighting back. For not just accepting it when she moved in, for holding the line when I wasn't strong enough to do it myself. If you hadn't done that, we'd probably still be stuck in that dynamic. She'd still be in our house, still trying to run our lives, and I'd still be too guilty to tell her no." I squeezed his hand. "You got there eventually. That's what matters. But you got there first," he said. "And you showed me it was possible to say no to her without the world ending. That's a gift. I hope you know that." I did know it now. At the time, in the middle of those exhausting 3 months, it had just felt like survival. But looking back, I could see it for what it was, a turning point, a moment when I'd chosen to fight for my own space and dignity instead of sacrificing them for the sake of keeping peace. And that choice had changed everything. 3 years after my mother-in-law showed up at my door with her suitcases, I opened that same door to find a young woman standing on the threshold. She looked exhausted and terrified, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 4. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice shaking. "My husband gave me your name. He works with your husband. He said you might be able to help me." I didn't know her, had never seen her before, but I recognized the look in her eyes, the desperation, the feeling of being trapped with nowhere to turn. "What do you need?" I asked, already opening the door wider. "My mother-in-law moved in 6 months ago," she said, and her voice broke. "And I don't know how to make her leave. I don't know how to make any of them see that I'm drowning. Your husband told my husband that you'd been through something similar, and I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. I need someone to tell me it's okay to want my own house back." I looked at her, at this stranger who'd come to my door because she'd heard somehow that I would understand. And I did understand. I understood exactly what she was feeling and exactly how hard it was to articulate it to people who thought you were being selfish or difficult or ungrateful for help. "Come in," I said. "Let's talk." She came in and I made tea, and she told me her story while her son played quietly with Emma's old toys. It was different from mine in the details, but identical in the shape. The mother-in-law who didn't ask permission just arrived and stayed. The husband who couldn't see the problem or didn't want to acknowledge it. The slow erosion of identity and authority in her own home. The feeling of being a guest in her own life. I listened to it all, and then I told her my story. I told her about the boundaries I'd set and how I'd enforced them. I told her about the family meeting and the 3-month timeline and the constant exhausting work of holding my ground. I told her about the fights and the tension and the moments when I'd thought about giving up. "But you didn't give up," she said. No, I agreed. I didn't, because I realized that if I gave up, I'd lose everything that mattered to me: my home, my role as a mother, my marriage, my sense of self. It was too high a price to pay for peace. How did you do it? She asked. How did you find the strength? I thought about that for a moment. I stopped thinking of it as being difficult or unreasonable. I started thinking of it as protecting my family. You're not being selfish for wanting boundaries. You're being a good mother and a good wife by insisting on a healthy dynamic. And if your husband can't see that, then you need to help him see it. We talked for 2 hours, working through strategies and options and ways forward. By the time she left, she looked less defeated and more determined. I didn't know if she'd succeed in getting her mother-in-law out of her house, but I knew she had a better chance now that she'd seen it was possible. After she left, my husband, who'd come home in the middle of our conversation and stayed quietly in the background, came into the kitchen where I was washing the teacups. "That was kind of you," he said. "It wasn't kind," I said. "It was necessary. Someone did that for me once, validated my feelings, and told me I wasn't crazy for being upset. A friend from work who'd been through something similar. It made all the difference." "Still," he said, "you didn't have to spend 2 hours with a stranger working through her problems." "Yes, I did," I said, "because I remember what it felt like to think I was the only one, to think that everyone else just accepted these situations, and I was the only one who couldn't handle it. If I can spare her that, then I will." He put his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You know what I think about sometimes?" he said. "I think about what would have happened if you hadn't stood up to her, if you'd just let her stay and slowly take over. Where would we be now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But nowhere good." "Nowhere good," he agreed. "Maybe divorced. Maybe together, but miserable, living separate lives in the same house, while my mother ran everything. Maybe I would have eventually seen the problem, but it would have been too late to fix it." "We'll never know," I said, "because that's not what happened." "Because you fought," he said. "Because you refused to accept something that would have destroyed us." I turned around to face him. "We fought," I corrected. "Once you understood what was happening, you fought too. That's what made the difference." "I should have seen it sooner." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. But you saw it eventually and you chose us. That's what matters." 5 years after my mother-in-law moved out, Emma started asking questions. She was 7 now, old enough to have clear memories of that time, old enough to wonder about the things she'd sensed but not understood. "Why doesn't Grandma come over more?" she asked one night at dinner. My husband and I exchanged a glance. We'd known this conversation would come eventually. "Grandma has her own life now," I said carefully. "She's married, and she has her own house, and we see her sometimes, but she's busy with her own things." "But she used to live here," Emma said. "I remember. She slept in the office room, and you and Daddy were always talking in quiet voices." "That was a long time ago," my husband said, "and it was just temporary. She needed a place to stay while she figured some things out." "Did you want her to leave?" Emma asked, looking at me with those too perceptive eyes. I could have lied. I could have said something diplomatic about how it was time for her to have her own space, but I'd learned over the past 5 years that honesty, delivered gently, was better than comfortable lies. "Yes," I said. "I did want her to leave. Living together was hard for all of us. We love Grandma, but families need their own space sometimes. It doesn't mean we don't love each other. It just means we love each other better when we have some room to breathe." Emma thought about this. "Like how I love you, but I don't want you to come to school with me." "Exactly like that," I said, smiling. "You love us, but you need your own space to grow and learn and be yourself." She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to her dinner. But later, when I was tucking her into bed, she said quietly, "I'm glad Grandma doesn't live here anymore. The house feels better now." My heart clenched. "Why do you say that?" "Because you smile more," she said simply, "and you and Daddy don't fight in quiet voices anymore, and I don't have to worry about making you sad." I sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair back from her face. "You never made me sad, sweetheart. Never. You're the best thing in my life." "I know," she said. But sometimes when Grandma was here, you would look sad when you looked at me, like you were worried about something. You don't look like that anymore. Children see everything, they understand more than we think they do, and they carry the emotional weather of their homes inside them, even when we think we're hiding it well. I was worried then, I admitted, but not about you. I was worried about other things, adult things, and I'm not worried anymore, so you don't need to worry either, okay? Okay, she said, already drifting off to sleep. I sat with her a while longer, watching her breathe, thinking about the home we'd built and protected. It wasn't perfect, no home is, but it was ours and it was healthy, and it was filled with the kind of love that comes from choosing each other every day rather than being trapped together by obligation or guilt. 10 years after my mother in law moved out, she died. It was sudden, a heart attack that took her in her sleep. She was 73 years old, and by all accounts, she'd been happy in her last years with her husband, living her own life, no longer trying to live through her son. At the funeral, my husband cried, not the distant, obligatory tears of a son who'd become estranged, but genuine grief for a mother he'd loved, despite her flaws. A mother who'd done her best even when her best included manipulation and control and an inability to see where she ended and others began. She was difficult, he said to me after the service, standing in the parking lot while Emma talked to her grandfather. But she was my mother, and in her own way, she loved me. I know she did, I said. Love and healthy boundaries aren't mutually exclusive. You can love someone and still need distance from them. Do you think she knew? He asked. That we were keeping her at arm's length? That things changed after she moved out? I think she knew, I said. But I also think she understood eventually. She found her own life, her own happiness. If she'd still been trying to live through you, she never would have done that. He nodded slowly. Maybe setting boundaries was the kindest thing we could have done for her. Maybe it forced her to find what she really needed instead of trying to take it from us. Maybe, I agreed. We stood in the sunlight watching Emma laugh at something her step-grandfather said, and I thought about all the ways families can hurt each other while thinking they're helping, all the ways love can become suffocating if it's not tempered with respect for autonomy and space. My mother-in-law had shown up at my door with 3 suitcases and a plan to move in, to take over, to reshape our lives according to her vision of what they should be. And I'd said no. I'd fought back. I'd insisted on my right to live my own life in my own house according to my own values. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, and it had been worth it. Because in the end, the answer to her question about how long she was staying had been simple: as long as it took for her to understand that she couldn't stay forever, as long as it took for us to establish boundaries that protected our family while still honoring her needs, as long as it took for everyone to learn that love without respect is just another form of control. 3 months had been the answer, 3 months of hell, followed by years of slowly rebuilding trust and establishing a healthier dynamic. 3 months that had changed everything, that had forced all of us to grow and change and figure out how to love each other from a respectful distance. I'd opened the door that afternoon expecting a package, and I'd found my mother-in-law with suitcases. And when I'd asked how long she was staying, her answer had left me speechless, moving in, as if it were already decided. But it hadn't been decided. Nothing is ever decided until you accept it. And I'd chosen not to accept it. I'd chosen to fight for my space, my family, my life. And in the end, that choice had saved everything that mattered.